what we see from Andrew's presentation is that there is a clear return on investment on all, or not all, but on the vast majority of open data applications in place. So it's not just putting data online for putting data online, but you see the actual results. So as countries put more data online, they find out they're saving money and actually making more money to create jobs, opportunities, and so forth. Okay, our next presenter is Ms. Micheline Casey. Let me just put up her bio here. You can start there. Micheline is the Chief Data Officer for the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System and has the Office of the Chief Data Officer. It's a newly created Office of Chief Data Officer, emphasizes the importance of management and data information as a major strategic priority of the board. As the CDO, Ms. Casey leads the OCDO as the responsibility for creating and implementing the board's. Hey, my thing just disappeared on me here. Anyway, Ms. Casey, please take the floor, so we won't waste any time there. It's all yours. Yeah, I'm ready for you, my dear.
All right, hold on. Just going forward or back? Okay, great.
You good to go?
All right, there we go. So, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be in the Gulf region for the first time. I am going to give you my perspective on both what the Federal Reserve Board is doing, but also the importance of data governance and data management to open data efforts. I always have to front end my speeches by saying these views are mine and not those necessarily of the Board of Governors or the Federal Reserve System. I'll get into a little bit of the structure of the Federal Reserve System in just a minute, but I wanted to start with a quote from a recently released report. I don't know if you've seen this, from Open Data 500. It's a think tank in the US. Talking about, and particularly about 2014 feeling like the year of open data. So I thought it was very appropriate given what we're doing today. The Open Data 500 report is actually a review of US federal government agencies' use of open data, particularly with the Obama administration. There have been a number of memoranda to the federal agencies to make more data open, which I will talk about in a minute. But just briefly, I think it helps to set the stage. So the Federal Reserve Board is the central bank of the United States. We, at the Board of Governors, are in Washington, D.C. There are 12 district banks that make up the Federal Reserve System, but Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke, et cetera, are part of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. And our mission, of course, as a central bank is to make sure we've got a safer, more flexible monetary and financial system. I am the first Chief Data Officer of the Federal Reserve Board. The board recognized post-financial crisis a couple of things about their data environment. And the first was that post-financial crisis, they're dealing with more data than they ever have previously and really scaling those collections of data sets and acquisitions of data sets in ways that they were not prepared to do. And it is a very data-driven organization. Our products are entirely data-based, and managing the data assets is extremely important for us to have good economic research, good monetary policy decisions, et cetera. As of this moment, I am the only Chief Data Officer of any central bank on the planet. I am hoping that soon the Bank of England will be joining me in hiring a Chief Data Officer a little bit later this year. And the Office of the Chief Data Officer was created actually in 2013 through our strategic plan. Our strategic plan is actually online at federalreserve.gov if anybody is interested in actually reading that. Improving data governance and data management is strategic theme number 2, right behind financial stability. The Office of the Chief Data Officer is really, I like to say that we're a startup in a 100-year-old organization. We have existed since May of last year. I joined the board May 20th last year, so I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary. And the mission of the OCDO is to support all of the board's missions through strategic thought leadership, policy setting, advisory services, and collaborative outreach to optimize data and information assets, not only at the Federal Reserve Board, but across the Federal Reserve System for board delegated functions that might live across the district banks. So really what we're doing is providing data governance and data management, including enterprise data strategy, information architecture. I've got teams that pull in about half of the data that we collect as a federal agency. To set a bit of a backdrop, the Federal Reserve Board is actually a federal agency. That's not widely known and understood by folks in the United States, but we actually are a federal agency. But we're considered an independent agency because we take no money from Congress. We literally are completely financially off on our own and turn money back to Treasury every year. But in the context of what's been going on since the Obama administration kicked off the open data efforts several years ago, I thought that would be actually a nice place to start. So we've seen over the past few years, there's actually been 4 separate memoranda that have come out around open data in the United States. And the first came out in 2009 and was really sort of basic, what I think of as basic open data efforts. And the emphasis was really on pushing data sets out to the public, improving transparency, particularly around budgets and spend at the federal, state, and local level. In 2013, we saw quite a bit of maturing in the thinking around the publication of open data. So certainly it's one thing to push a data set out one time. It's another thing to have a sustainable program in which you continually push out the same data set to make it extremely useful and make sure that it's a high quality data set for consumption into apps, into programs, into mobile devices, et cetera. And that really requires a strong data governance and data management framework across the life cycle of managing those data sets. And then finally, the one that's, somewhat interesting for us at the Fed, because we are a statistical agency as well as the Central Bank of the United States, is 1406 actually talks about the production of statistical data and the stewardship and management of those data sets, again, across the life cycle. So at the Federal Reserve Board, we have actually participated in open data efforts for years. If you think about open data just in terms of pushing data out, if you think about the more sophisticated pieces of it in terms of standards, in terms of licensing, certificates, things like that, we certainly have a way to go. But we are both consumers of data sets from other federal agencies, other open data sets that they make available, and we are suppliers of open data. Certainly I think, as I mentioned earlier, I've got a team that sits within the OCDO that pulls in about half the data that we get at the board for economic research and monetary policy making. We pull in all the statistical data from the other federal statistical agencies and an awful lot of internationally related data sets from other international statistical agencies and central banks around the world. And certainly high quality data sets are really important for us to be able to pull the data in, get it loaded appropriately, and for folks on the end user side of things to be able to leverage that data as quickly and as efficiently as possible. On the supply side, we and central banks around the world really have been pushing out data for a long time. In 2006, we actually created the data download program which I'm going to show you in a minute. And it's the production of our statistical data based on international standards. But since 1996, we have been actually publishing data on the Federal Reserve's website. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about data governance and data management, because it's, again, having open data sets, while critically important, doesn't add a lot of value to the public if you don't have a good, strong way of managing that data across the life cycle such that it is high quality data when it actually gets published. And it doesn't just happen. You actually do have to manage it across the entire supply chain from the time you get data in-house, and while it's governed, and understand the lineage of it and what systems it's hitting and how it's being transformed before you actually push it out. So data governance, from a technical term, is the exercise of authority, control, and shared decision-making over the management of data assets across the life cycle. It's really ensuring that folks across your entire enterprise are managing data in consistent ways to ensure the quality and the usability of the data in decision-making processes. within the Federal Reserve Board, again, the OCDO has been around for less than a year now, and certainly lots of people have been managing data for 100 years, but they haven't been managing it in a consistent way. So part of the charge of my office is really to put standardized policies, processes, and procedures around how we manage data, again, from the time we bring data in-house to the time it actually gets distributed and disseminated either internally or externally. We've got a team within my organization that does this and supports this. We've got a group called the Board Data Council, which is made up of senior officers from all of our divisions, and as well as representation from the Federal Reserve System that provides strategic advice, insight, and priority making, as well as approval processes for those data governance policies and procedures. And then we do very specific data management activities. And certainly, we ourselves, as large consumers of open data sets from other agencies, are very impacted by how well other federal agencies manage their data and the quality at which they manage their data and their ability to actually get us data in timely periods. For example, if the Bureau of Labor Statistics, on the day the unemployment rate comes out, decides to just drop randomly one of its tables, our systems can come to a crashing halt without that advanced knowledge, or if they had changed a formula without letting us know, that impacts our ability to ingest those data sets. I want to talk a little bit about interoperability. We were talking about this a little bit last evening at dinner. But certainly, the technology side of data, of open data, is really the easiest thing to manage. Institutionally, when you look at how, part of open data, one of the goals of open data is to have the data sets be available in machine-readable formats that makes them very easy to transfer and makes them quite highly interoperable, regardless of what the receiving set of tools and technologies actually is. But it's important when you think about interoperability to think about it in terms of layers: institutional interoperability, human interoperability, the interoperability of the data and the data models underlying it and the data architecture, as well as the pure technology infrastructure. And data governance really lives at those top three layers, and ensuring, particularly when you're talking about open data, that institutions and folks using those data sets understand exactly what data they're getting. And this can be in the form of metadata that's used to describe the data, how often it's published, who's responsible for it, et cetera. For those on the end user side to know how to consume that data, what to do with that data, if anything within that data needs to be scrubbed before it can be actually leveraged, and for the data itself to be actually consumed, merged, and mashed up with other data sets, particularly in environments with large legacy infrastructures. You tend to see a proliferation of data models and data architectures that are not normalized, which makes it much harder to actually merge the data sets together. So I'm going to shift gears now and talk a little bit about what we're actually doing in terms of our open data efforts and where we're going. As I mentioned before, we actually produce an awful lot of open data today. We push out macroeconomic and microeconomic data. We push out statistical information as a statistical agency, banking and financial data, international data, and then policy-making information. And I call this information and not data because things like our Federal Open Market Committee meeting minutes, the decision-making processes that the board and the governors use to actually set interest rates, those are made publicly available following the FOMC meetings, but they're not actual structured data sets. They are unstructured documents. So I'm going to walk you through a series of websites and places to find our data. As I mentioned before, while we do produce an awful lot of data, I wouldn't call our approach to open data very sophisticated. We've got data scattered in lots of different places across our website. I've included URLs if you're interested in any of these websites in particular that you can go directly to them. But there's probably at least 10 different places on the Fed's portal where you can find a variety of open data sets, some of it in machine-readable format, and too much of it, unfortunately, in PDF format. The most popular area to go is both our banking information regulation side and our economic research and data side. So I'm just going to show you where some of these things live on our website, again, just if you're interested in taking a look at any of these data sets. Not really sure how many clicks I have on here. So with our statistical data, the data download program is something that we launched in 2006, and we're working on the second version today. This is where you would go to find any statistical data that you want out of the Federal Reserve. It allows you to create packages of a variety of different data sets, as well as vintages of data sets, so year over year over year over year of those data sets. These data sets are available in a format called SDMX, which is an XML-based format that was created by the BIS, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and many central banks for producing statistics. So again, you can build packages, you can select particular types of data that you're interested in. You get some semblance of metadata with these data sets, but there's not a lot. We can definitely do a better job of that and be able to publish it. So we also provide a number of working papers that our economists have produced. One of the things that we're working on this year through our research library is actually being able to assign digital object identifiers to the raw data sets that live behind those working papers. And again, we purchase an awful lot of data from third-party vendors such as Bloomberg, Thomson Reuters, Moody's, et cetera. Copyrighted data would not be available as part of those raw data sets due to copyright licenses, but certainly any of the data sets that we have internally or we get from the other statistical agencies that are open data sets, we want to be able to link the PDF working papers, the unstructured documents with the actual raw data sets on the backside. So you can expect that later this year from us. We also have just recently introduced one of our first set of economic models called FERBIS. Let me go back one. It's the circle just here on the left. We actually released this a few weeks ago. This is one of the few set of algorithmic models that we've made publicly available, but you can go out to our website and download that and play around with that. Let's see, working papers, DOIs. One of the key data sets that we have, which is sort of authoritative data really globally, and that was mentioned a little bit earlier, or hinted at a little bit earlier, and I believe Richard Sterling might be talking a little bit about it later too, is what we call our NIC data. Our National Information Center collects and has collected for years the structure of financial institutions. And this is critically important in terms of understanding how financial institutions hierarchically are connected to each other. So when we say JP Morgan Chase, for example, what does that mean? How are entities called JP Morgan Chase connected to each other globally? In terms of monitoring financial risks systemically across the world, these are really high value data sets for us. We currently publish this in PDF, which is not helpful for those like Chris Taggart, who desperately calls me about once a week to get these in machine readable formats, and I continue to promise Chris that will happen this calendar year. Again, these are master data sets. They are the authoritative data sets in the United States for financial structure, and we will be publishing these in machine readable format this year. Again, you can go out to NIC Web. Again, just one of many places on the Federal Reserve website where you can get open data. Federal Open Market Committee. So this slide actually is out of that same Open Data 500 that I used at the beginning of my presentation. The Open Data 500 not only looked at what the federal agencies were actually publishing out, but they did a cursory review of who was actually using those data sets. And this is actually the Fed's view. So I went down into Federal Reserve Board, and it popped up what sort of organizations are actually using our data today. As you would expect, we've got lots of sort of organizational investors, Bridgewater, which happens to be the largest global hedge fund on the planet, Vanguard, you know, I think of this as the low-hanging fruit in terms of organizations using our data, and certainly I think we're barely scratching the surface of potential users for the really valuable data that we've got at the board. Certainly for global economic research, global financial stability, global monetary policy making, we've got a rich array of data that we should be pushing out in machine-readable formats, and so we really are just scratching the surface. One of the things I was talking about on Friday with the Open Data Institute, actually, well, there were a couple things, but imagine being able to leverage some of these data sets in looking at the health of a city, the economic health of a city real time. So if you think about smart cities, which the Gulf is sort of known for, you guys have done an awful lot with sensor data, technology data, and trying to create smart cities. If you were able to take the pulse real time of the financial and economic health of your cities, how powerful would that be? Today, at the Fed, we use lagging indicator data to figure out what's happened and try to project out what's going to happen, but we have no way today to, i.e., have a Fitband to take the real-time pulse of what's actually happening. I think there are really powerful use cases like that, and so we certainly intend to partner with lots of organizations to try to get there. So the future and what we intend to do this calendar year into next, first of all, is actually create an open data strategy and open data plan. That has not existed before. And certainly, given what you've seen of our website, we have a lot of improvement on the user experience side that we need to do. Operationally, we continue to focus on our data governance efforts to support data quality and quality in the publication of our data sets. From a social media perspective, I'm working on getting at Federal Reserve Data as a Twitter handle. We want to leverage that both to raise awareness of the data sets that we're publishing, but also to crowdsource priorities for what data we continue to push out. And I wanted to just leave you with a few quotes. You know, the Fed over the years has not been known to be the most open and transparent institution, but certainly since Chairman Bernanke has been in, there's been a much stronger push for openness and transparency, and Chair Yellen is continuing those efforts. So I think 2014 into 2015, you'll see much different things coming out of the Fed in terms of its open data efforts. Thank you.